Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we are cracking open the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide and giving an in-depth review and look at what's in the book.
There are a few major changes from the 2014 DMG, and there is a lot that has stayed the same, but we are going to go over all of the various chapters in the book and tell you what you can expect if you're grabbing the new 2024 DMG. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
This video is not sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. We were not paid or compensated financially for making this video. Wizards of the Coast had no ability to review or preview or pre-screen this video before we put it out. They basically sent us the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that was that.
So we are going to be giving our honest opinions about the DMG and what we think is great and what we wish maybe had been a little different. There's a lot to look at, and we are going to be doing separate videos as well where we look at some of our favorite bits or the parts of the book that we think we can expand and talk about a lot further. But in this video, we're going to do more of a broad overview of everything that you can expect in this book.
So bottom line, the only thing that we received from Wizards was a review copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide so that we could make this video early. We were under a review embargo with an NDA for that purpose, which provided no restrictions on what we could say aside from giving us a date of when we could release this content. So again, we have been sponsored by Wizards of the Coast in the past on separate videos, and that felt under the usual terms of any of our sponsors with any of the sponsors that we've worked with on our channel. And yes, we do work with Wizards of the Coast because our books are available on D&D Beyond. So we say this and we acknowledge all this so that you can recognize that yes, we do have a business relationship with Wizards because our books are on D&D Beyond. But we are not being compensated by Wizards to make this video. We didn't have to make this video if we didn't want to make this video. All that to say, we are not being paid by Wizards to make this video. Our opinions are our own and unvarnished, what we want to say about it. In general, Kelly and I like to be positive people about these things because we think that there is too much vitriol online in general. So if you are hoping for the evisceration take on any of the new 2024 content, there's lots of other great content creators that you can check out for that, but you're not going to find a lot of that here.
We love being positive and we love loving the games that we love. So we're going to keep loving it and we're going to talk to you about what we love. There's a lot of love.
Okay. So if you had the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, you'd know that that was a pretty middlingly useful book overall.
I used it for magic items.
Yeah, I used it for magic items.
That's about it. I think I glanced at some of the other rules in the 2014 book once. I used it for firearms and siege weapons.
I used it for its monster building rules. Predominantly. So there was a table in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide that broke down monsters by CR and like what stats to use for them by challenge rating. And I found that actually it was pretty reliable, although it never matched up with any of the actual monsters in the monster manual.
I do feel like in the 2014 book, besides the magic item section, which I use constantly, the rest of the DMG amounted to maybe 4 to 5 pages of useful information that I used readily at the table constantly. So the main question that we're going into today's video with is, does this one do better?
Yeah. So the new Dungeon Master's Guide is broken down into 8 chapters plus 2 appendixes. Chapters 1 and 2 cover the basics and running the game. Whereas chapter 3 goes into a DM's toolbox of different rules and systems that you can use in other ways.
Chapters 4 and 5, respectively, are creating adventures and creating campaigns. They're a bit of a play-by-play on how to build your adventures and settings.
Now, Chapter 5 also includes a gazetteer to the classic Greyhawk setting, the original D&D sort of official setting. And from there, it moves into Chapter 6, Cosmology, which pretty much is just a truncated manual of the planes covering the Great Wheel cosmology.
Chapter 7, our favorite chapter, probably still continuing into this book, will be Treasure. We love the magic items. We love the treasure. Chapter 8 is the brand new rules for the Bastions, which is base building sort of rule set for D&D 5e.
There's 2 appendixes, a lore glossary, and a bunch of cool maps. So looking at the maps and the handouts that are actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a poster map of the Greyhawk setting and some maps of Greyhawk in general. There's also the 15 black and white maps by Dyson Logos for common adventuring locations, including like a village, a dragon's lair, a keep, a mine, a ship, and etc.
We also have 9 tracking sheets that you can use as player handouts for things like Session 0, travel, PCs, NPCs, settlements, campaign journals, conflicts, magic items, and Bastions. So there's a lot of different handouts that you can actually photocopy or print out from this book and give your players.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to ask some WotC folks about this at GameholeCon, and apparently all these tracking sheets will also be available as downloads.
Good.
And they have a very cutesy art style to them. There are also 400 magic items in this book. Most of them are reprints from the previous DMG or from Xanathar's, but there's a couple brand new ones as well.
I think about 20 or so brand new ones, which is fun to see. I mean, I didn't really want any of the magic items from the previous book to go away, so seeing a batch of new ones is pretty exciting.
So we're going to run chapter by chapter, talk about what we like, what we don't like, and what you can expect from it, and who might find value in that chapter. This is going to be pretty exhaustive, so strap in. So chapter 1, the basics, is a step-by-step guide to running a session. And honestly, it really starts off with a lot of classic DM tips, of things that you can expect and a lot of principles. Like if you've ever seen our video on like principles for dungeon masters, it's a pretty old video, but like this chapter feels like a distillation of some of the best DMing advice and game prep advice that is around. Like there was nothing in here that was like, oh, I don't know that.
Yeah, it's a lot of information that people who are experienced with DMing already know. But I do want to also point out that a lot of this information wasn't in the 2014 DMG, and it's the same things that we have been preaching on our channel since we started it. So it is actually pretty lovely to go through the step-by-step guide to running a session, look at how to prep your adventures, how to have fun with the people at your table, what sort of play styles you can expect, the different player types that you might experience. A lot of this is in a very positive and collaborative light, which is a lot of what we've promoted on this channel for a long time. So it did feel like if you took the catalog of Dungeon Dude's advice and just shoved it into...
You don't have to be that self-congratulatory.
But it's not like we've never said anything that's like groundbreaking. All that we're saying is like, have fun playing the game with your friends. And they really drive that home in a lot of good ways in this chapter.
I really like how they outline, how to spend 1, 2, or 3 hours of preparing for a game. I think that's pretty useful. And I think for a lot of new dungeon masters, having a lot of these things there on the page immediately is going to be really reassuring. It also immediately acknowledges session 0 and gives dungeon masters some pretty concise advice for dealing with overly cautious or antisocial behavior from players. But I also want to call out a few things that actually kind of floored me to see in the book. And I almost feel like these are 4 things that we've never made a video about them because they kind of feel like hot takes, but I'm glad that they're here. And this is on page 19, and it's critical rules for GMs, for DMs about the rules. And it basically comes out and says, hey, the rules of Dungeons and Dragons aren't physics. They're not a physics simulator. And also the game is not an economic simulator either. And these are 2 things that, like, I feel like I've always been hesitant to say these things on the channel because there's a lot of people who really want D&D to be an economic simulator and to be a physics simulator. And they want the rules to fall in line with those things. And I feel like coming out and saying, actually, Dungeons and Dragons, at least 5th edition, is not a game that does that, is a good thing. It kind of calls out like the explicit example of there's this famous example of how you could get like a bunch of commoners to all ready actions to pass a spear to each other. And by abusing the action economy, you theoretically accelerate a spear to the speed of light. Or they call it the example of like the famous like bag of rats thing, where like you have a warlock that has that invocation that gives them temporary hit points, and they carry a bag of rats to drop around, provoke opportunity attacks, and get a bunch of temporary HP. And I feel, and this basically comes into line like with the final thing that they say about this chapter is that the rules rely on good faith interpretation. And
that was probably my favorite thing to read in this whole book, because most of the arguments we have online with people are good faith versus bad faith interpretations of the rules. And now the book just says, like, don't mess around with trying to exploit the rules to ruin the fun at the table.
Yeah, and I feel like recently, like, a lot of the really big complaints about the 2024 PHP, and especially some of the rules exploits that have come out of it. Like, I remember there was a little bit of conversation earlier about the new Warcaster feat, and because someone was like, the rules don't say you can't make opportunity attacks against your allies, so you can use Warcaster to, like, have your allies provoke opportunity attacks so you can heal them. And I'm like, that's a bad faith reading of the rules.
Yeah.
And so now I really like that the core rule books basically say, be wary of bad faith interpretations of the rules. And I like that that's there, because I feel like it's possible to basically ruin any role-playing game by making bad faith interpretations of the rules.
Also, the more rules that you have in a game, I feel like you're inherently going to run into a place where you can exploit them. The more rules there are, the more exploits you can find.
Yeah.
But none of these games are designed for a person to sit down and circle in red all of the little loopholes that they can create and then create the most. I mean, we like finding the broken things or creating optimized characters that use a lot of conjunctions of ideas. But at the same time, when we're playing at the table, we are just there to have fun. We're there to play the game with our friends and enjoy it. And they're really saying in this book, go have fun with your friends and use the rules as a guide.
There's a difference between optimizing within the rules and making a bad faith rules interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think conflating those two things is, like, we need to be careful about conflating those things.
No, and I do want to differentiate. Like, I like creating a powerful character. But I do it in good faith to the idea of the game. But there's people who will like try to break the game with their builds and with exploiting rules.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to avoid. It's not a game about exploiting all of the loopholes. It's a game about having fun with your friends.
So overall, I feel like this first chapter kind of lays out a really good philosophy for how D&D is run, which is an excellent distillation of a lot of the philosophies that we've utilized ourselves. I really like it. I felt very happy reading it. I was like, yes, this is a good thing to say. And you know, it's that type of thing where, like, I think you need to read it once.
Yeah.
And then it's not really a thing that you come back to. But I'm glad it's there.
I will say that I think most experienced DMs probably could glance over this and already know most of what's in here.
Yeah.
But there are a few experienced DMs who probably need to be reminded of the way the game is supposed to feel.
Yeah, and a few players as well. Like, in particular, I really do like how this section calls out how to deal with antisocial behavior. Like, it basically talks about how, like, some players want to live out antisocial fantasies at the table, and basically says, like, you don't need to accommodate that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's very empowering. Like, it basically says, yes, you should be supportive of your players, but here's when to say no. Like, here's when they're stretching the limits of it. And antisocial behavior and bad faith interpretations of the rules are basically the two things that, like, that is the line. Like, that is when the DM gets to put their foot down and legitimately say no. Yeah.
As we move on to Chapter 2, Running the Game, this is where we get into a little bit more of the meat of what D&D is. It's going to open with the classic breakdown of player types, group sizes, dealing with absent players, having a rotating DM, which I think was a pretty cool section in there. And then it moves into a guide sort of for dice rolls, ability checks, setting DCs, using advantage or disadvantage, and resolving outcomes. All the standard stuff. If you've been playing D&D for a while, you know this.
So I felt that this section was missing from the PHB. And I said this in my review of the PHB before. I felt that the PHB didn't give a lot of guidelines on what different DCs are, what examples of different ability checks might be. And I'm going to say I'm disappointed in the way that this has come out in the Dungeon Master's Guide as well. I don't know, maybe it's just me and this is like my exhaustiveness is like, I really like it when the rules give a ton of examples of different DCs for different skill checks. And I can understand why they don't give a ton of different examples, because the more examples you give, the more it's like, oh, this is always this case. Like when the rule books give an exhaustive account of like, this is every possible DC for a acrobatics check, then it can feel a little bit stringent and constrained. So I can understand the argument for why they didn't do it, but I feel like this is still not enough.
I'm indifferent. I mean, this is also the part of the book that I'm probably not going to read. I might glance at it because I've been DMing
this is
for
the
so
stuff
long.
that goes on a DM screen, right?
Yeah. I after a while, you kind of just, I mean, yeah, I hear you.
I just think that there are people out there that really struggle with how to set a DC, and it takes a lot of time to learn that. And
fun question for you. After years of playing, because this has happened to me, do you have like set numbers in your head that you kind of just default to?
Well, I mean, the dark secret of it is that for a lot of D&D play, I think that
DC 15. I always land on DC 15.
Yeah, it's like anything over a 20 pretty much always has to be a success. Like you're kind of being a jerk if you, like in most cases, every time I've used a DC over 20, I've kind of felt like a jerk for it. Like even there was a recent time in the game where I was like, where we were DMing, where it's like, it's a DC 30. And you were like, I have no chance of making that. I'm like, well, it felt appropriate because for that circumstance.
My defaults are 12, 15, 18. I don't know why. I can't explain it, but usually if something's mundane, 10, but usually if I'm asking for a roll, it's because there's a challenge. And depending on how hard the challenge is, I'm usually setting it to 12, 15, or 18.
Yeah, so I'll actually say like my sort of thing was Monty Cook's Numenera was where Monty Cook's Numenera is an example of where it lays this out really, really well. And it goes in increments of 3 on the DCs. And so it goes like 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 on the and I've always felt steps of 3 is better than steps of 5.
That makes, I didn't even realize I was doing steps of 3.
I know. So like, because I personally feel that the difference between DC 10, DC 15, and DC 20, it's too much.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. Like I use a lot of DC 12 and I use a lot of DC 18, because I find that granularity in play is a lot more useful. And I would say 90% of the time, most of my DCs are going to be either 12, 15, or 18.
Yeah.
Too.
Cool.
That's
that's reassuring to know that those are the 3 numbers.
But also it's when to use those different, because I just think that 12, like they're just better.
Yeah.
They're just better than 10, 15, 20. And I can't even articulate why.
Me neither. They're just the numbers I went to.
Yeah. It's a weird thing.
You know what is really awesome though that they have included in this DMG?
Yes, I love this.
So for years, I've been playing Monster of the Week, and one thing that I said I borrowed and inherently use in D&D all the time is degrees of success and success at a cost. And it's here. It's here.
It's actually degrees of success. Like the fact that when I saw these words, and these words explicitly used, like we've talked about this on the channel before about how degrees of success, and if you don't know what these are essentially degrees of success says that you have the DC for the check, but you can reward players for beating the DC by 5 or more, or you can make the failure less bad, or even worse if they fail by 5 or more. So a really core example of this that you actually see, that you've seen in 2014 is I think that there is the example of like the Medusa, where if you fail your saving throw against the Medusa's gaze by 5 or more, you immediately turn to stone.
Yeah.
Right. And
So I love that simple idea of here's where the DC is. If you succeed, great, you succeed. But if you succeed by 5 or more, something extra happens.
Yeah.
And if you fail, you fail. But if you fail by 5 or more, something worse happens. And it creates, you could even argue that if they fail, but they don't fail by 5 or more, that's when you can use success at a cost. And so let's say they're trying to jump out a window, and they're smashing through glass. Well, if they fail, but only by 1 or 2, they jump out the window successfully, but they take slashing damage.
Yeah. And so again, like, Monster of the Week and like Apocalypse World uses these things a lot. For anyone that's played, like, as soon as you play RPGs that aren't D&D, success at a cost is sort of, and degrees of success are sort of everywhere because they're really good and very powerful narratively, right? Pathfinder 2nd Edition has basically 4 degrees of success, where there's usually failure, success, and critical failure. And you know, D&D's kind of inherently always had that, because an attack roll has actually always had degrees of success, because we've always had critical hits, critical miss, although there's not really rules for critical miss. There's critical hit, and miss, right? So there's actually 3 different possible outcomes to every attack roll, right? Now, I really like this. Again, this is one of those things where, so glad the rules have introduced it. I would have loved to have seen more examples of how to implement it.
Yeah.
So this is the only issue that I have with it, is that I'm glad they're here. I'm glad that they tell DMs that exist, but I feel like the material surrounding success at a cost and degrees of success that is introduced in the Dungeon Master's Guide 2024 is insufficient to use these rules unless you've played another RPG that already taught you how to use them.
That's fair.
Yeah. So I think a new DM who's like, what is degrees of success, is probably going to come away from encountering this in the DMG being like, I don't understand how to do this. And the reason why is because in order to tell a dungeon master what degrees of success looks like, you actually have to provide examples of different ability checks and what the degrees of success for that might look like. And the examples that are here are not sufficient to fully illustrate the range of how powerful these mechanics can be at the table.
Also, in this chapter, we are going to get improvising damage and damage severity tables. Those are on page 30 and 31. Guides to running exploration and social interaction. Although I will say, as Monty has said about several parts in this book, I mean, we don't want a 400-page book, but maybe we do, because the guides to running exploration and social interactions, they are here. They are everything that you expect them to say.
As in, they're very bare bones and don't really go into much detail about how to actually run exploration.
I have always wanted D&D to. So this is actually the perfect place to expand on degrees of success and success at a cost. Because you know where the number one place to use degrees of success and success at a cost
exploration
is?
and social interaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That is the place where they are going to come alive in so many ways. And luckily, we're here to tell you that. And you should be using degrees of success and success at a cost in your exploration and social interactions.
And skill challenges, which...
Yeah, skill challenges.
Again, how to run a skill... Like, this... Like, okay. Like, this is where, you know, if they wanted to take this further, they could have they could have brought in progress clocks as well into this, into skill challenges. Like, you know what the through line of this is that basically is, if you want to know how to be a better DM, play a system that's not D&D, because like
play a few,
but like essentially, like it is kind of funny how, like, I see in this chapter the threads of a writing team that wanted to take all the really good ideas from other RPGs and introduce a snippet.
Suggestion of the suggestion. You could borrow these concepts.
You could borrow these concepts.
Yeah.
But rather than developing them fully, because really and truly, degrees of success and success at a cost and rules for exploration and social interaction, they kind of need to be presented with the player material too. Like, there's a certain extent to which these things have to be in one book.
Yeah.
And separating them into the PHB and the Dungeon Master's Guide is a really difficult needle to thread. It's like, I see all these things, I'm like, yay, it's here. And I'm trying to separate my brain being the brain of someone who has played an Apocalypse World system, of someone who has played like a rules light York board system, or has played like super crunchy systems, and is familiar with these ideas and utilizes them and has internalized their use, from like someone who is reading this book for the very first time and who has never encountered these ideas at all before.
True.
And I feel like someone who has like never seen these things before, I don't think that this, like, I'm thinking back to like, you know, where I got progress clocks from. I encountered progress clocks spelled out in Blades in the Dark as an experienced GM. I encountered degrees of success in basically, I'm pretty sure my first like exposure to degrees of success was probably a Powered by the Apocalypse game, right?
Yeah.
And success at a cost, I actually don't know where I encountered that.
I mean, I did a bunch of it in Monster of the Week, but you didn't really play.
I think it's well, because it's a Powered by the Apocalypse system.
It is powered by
so like Powered by the Apocalypse systems inherently have success at a cost baked into them, because that's essentially their biggest thing. So like I just don't know if this successfully would introduce these ideas for someone that has never encountered it before. Skill challenges, like why?
Yeah.
Where are they? Why haven't they come back since 4th edition? Like, why? They're so, like...
We use skill challenges a lot.
I mean,
the more... you should.
Yeah, and like, again, the Blades in the Dark progress clock, and I'm pretty sure Blades in the Dark isn't even the first system that introduced the idea of the progress clock. It's just probably one of the most robust places I've seen it described.
The chapter ends with a whole section on running combat, which includes both how to run it in Theater of the Mind and also a deep look into using grids and maps and miniatures and all of that stuff.
It's very indicative that we get 1 page on rules for social exploration and 1 page on social and exploration, and then basically twice as many pages for combat as social and exploration combined.
You know, there is something to be said. I hear a lot of people online say that it's just a combat simulator. I have fun role-playing, and you and I are great at the social and exploration pillars, but I think it's because we have added a lot of our own brains into it. As we move on to the 3rd chapter, we are looking at the DM's Toolbox. This is the section that most of us are going to be spending majority of our time in. If we are experienced DMs, we probably will look at chapters 1 and 2 once, and then move on to this chapter for everything that we need. This is going to have rules for alignment, which I am never going to use, but they're here and they will always be here. We have rules for chases and creating custom backgrounds. Yay.
Yeah. If you're wondering where the rules for creating custom backgrounds are, they're here.
Yeah, thank you.
They're exactly what you thought they were. I'm just going to call out and say, like, why the one sentence of here's how you could make a custom background wasn't printed in the PHP. It would have taken 1 sentence to explain, to say that you can do it. Yeah. There's some light guidelines on making magic items and spells that are basically the rules for magic items and spells are, look at the existing magic items and spells.
You can make them too.
You can make them too. Yeah, there's not much more than that. Curses, disease, and death are all here. There's very light rules for making monsters. This is another beef that I have with this book, is that the rules for making monsters, and there's no rules for how to assign a challenge rating to a monster. I can only assume these are going to be in the monster manual. They better be in the monster manual, because basically the mechanical rules for making monsters that were in the 2014 DMG are gone from here. So you can't use them. It makes logical sense for them to be in the monster manual.
Yeah.
But that they're not here is worrying.
As expected in this chapter, we have game statistics for doors, dungeons, settlements, making NPCs, mapping dungeons. We have rules for hazards, fear, mental stress, traps, firearms, siege weapons, poisons, renown, supernatural gifts. There isn't actually a whole lot in this chapter that is new. It's all quite familiar from the 2014 DMG. That's not to say it's not useful.
This is like kind of like, I would call this chapter the like potpourri of rules that we couldn't fit into the player's handbook because they're not going to come up that much, and so they're here in the DMG in case you need them.
Yeah.
Right.
And like that is why we're going to be on this chapter so much as DMs.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm going to include firearms. Let's flip to the firearms section. Oh, let's design a few traps. Let's flip to the trap section and see what we get. Like these are the things that I used, and I'm like, we didn't want them to disappear. So yes, it's sort of redundant from the last book, but they got to be here, and it's essential that they're here.
Yeah. So as we move on to the next chapter, it's about making adventures. And anyone that's made an adventure is going to find a lot of the advice in this chapter pretty standard fare. Like, I think it's well presented for a new DM that's never made an adventure before.
If you're a very improv-focused DM, there are a lot of rollable tables. So you could, at the start of your game prep, just roll on a bunch of tables and be like, I don't know what we're doing tonight. Let's find out. And some people love doing that. So those tables are here, and you can do that.
Yeah. Most importantly, though, we got the new encounter building rules. So infamously, encounter building was broken and confusing in 2014 because it had like this weird table that was kind of fixed by Xanathar's Guide to Everything that gave you quick matchups. And it was kind of like hard to determine. The one table in Xanathar's that was like the ratios of monsters to players was brutal to use. Now you just have an XP budget. The budget is always what it should be.
Why did it take us so long?
Well, it's not why did, because it's been this in previous editions. It's sometimes been this, it's sometimes not been this. But like you have an XP budget is just the most intuitive way of doing it.
And it's so straightforward.
Yeah. So basically, here's what you do. You consult at the table, you choose, do you want to do low, moderate, or high difficulty? And then you check your player's level, and that's your budget. So for example, if you're doing an encounter of 4 level 5 PCs, you have an XP budget of 3,000 XP. Go grab 3,000 XP worth of monsters, right? So if you want to, like a challenge rating 5 monster is 1,800 XP. So you could grab a challenge rating 5 monster, throw that in there, and then you actually still have 1,200 XP.
For a few minions.
So this is what's interesting now, is that previously you would go, oh, 1 monster of a challenge rating equal to the party. That's a moderate encounter. It's not anymore. No. That would actually be easy. So you're able to use like at least 1 monster with an equal challenge rating to the party. And in fact, if you wanted to do a hard encounter, you could have 2 trolls. That would be like between the threshold for level 5, right? Or you could go and grab like, I guess 3,000 XP would be 12 CR1 monsters running at you. Which is a lot. Like the probably the most balanced in that is like, you know, challenge rating 3 monsters or 700 XP. So you could use like 4 of them.
Yeah. But with that, combined with the fact that the higher level encounters actually have a much bigger budget compared to what we saw in 2014, at a glance, this is a way, way better system for creating fair and decent combat encounters at your table. It was inherently broken in 2014 that your players just trounced any evenly matched combat encounter, and basically I only threw deadly encounters at my players and they still walked over most of them. Now I feel like we actually are looking at something that makes more sense in the game, and that feels really good. Yeah, and like I think the example of like the challenge rating 3 monsters, like 4 challenge rating 3 monsters against a party of 4 level 5s. In the 2014 rules, the 1-to-1 matchup was CR 2 monsters per 5 PCs. So generally, the moderate encounter, I think actually the new moderate is the old hard. Yeah. And the new high is the old deadly, and trivial and low has been kind of like cut off. So like encounters are harder now. You've got the DM has more of a budget, which I think is more appropriate here. Missing from this is how many encounters should there be per adventuring day? Yeah, it's something that most experienced DMs inherently know how many combat encounters they should be throwing at their table. But considering that this is a guide for new and experienced DMs to have, any new DM is has no indication of how many encounters they should be throwing at their players per day, which seems like a weird omission, considering how happy I am about the encounter balance budget system. It's also shared with this mild disappointment of just a sentence that said an average party fights 3 to 4 combat encounters per day.
Here's where I bring it all together, and this is like the weird thing. They flew so close to the sun, and yet they missed it. So at the end of this chapter, there are 5 example adventures that include 4 to 5 encounters each. You know what is not in this book? A tracking sheet that is the blank version of one of these outlines.
Yeah.
And had they done that, it would have been perfect, because these example adventures that they included at the end of these chapters are actually gorgeous templates to build adventure design off of. They're 1 page, like one of them I think is like 1 column of half a page.
Yeah.
And they basically all go like, what is the premise? What is the hook? Here is the list of 3 to 5 encounters. And then what is the resolution and how does it go? Why didn't they include a tracking sheet of this as a blank template is beyond me, because it's the most obvious, like it seems obvious to me.
You print it out, you fill in each box,
and there's
your
game
adventure.
prep, like, done.
Yeah.
And so like, it's like they could have answered the question of how many encounters should you have and given you a tool to do it. And they did like, it's weird. It's like, here you gave me 5 examples, but didn't give me the premise. Whereas earlier you gave me no examples and gave me the premise.
You even like, if they had written, what's your easy encounter to start? What's your moderate encounter next? What's your like moderate or hard, and then hard or deadly?
Well, I mean, like, you and I have been big fans of like the 5-room dungeon style, right? Yeah. Or like, you know how like we both talk about like, because they even talk about like the different categories of encounters. Like, you can have the exploration encounter, you can have the social encounter, you can have the hard. Like, if they just had been like, here in this template, like, encounter 1, is it exploration, social interaction, or combat? Is it what is it?
Yeah.
And it would have that would have been a really useful tool for a new dungeon master, because there you go. Here's your 1-page prep sheet laid out. Like, I can see it. And that's why, like, for me, I was so shocked. I feel like I had to double check to be like, wait, didn't they make a tracking sheet for this?
Yeah.
But they didn't.
With a few omissions, I will say though that the overall what is here is better. What they're missing is questionable of why they are missing it.
It's okay. Here's the thing. So far, it's like everything. There's a part of me that looks at this Dungeon Master's Guide and goes, so far, it's the best Dungeon Master's Guide that has ever been made for D&D. And have you ever heard about like that theory of like the uncanny valley in like robotics and machines, like how you build an android and it's so human-like that the closer and closer and closer and closer it gets to human, then all of a sudden it gets weird.
Yeah.
Right? Like because the ways that it's not human become very glaringly obvious. This Dungeon Master's Guide is so close to being perfect that the flaws are glaring.
That's fair.
Right? The things that it did not include, that the like where it just has this narrow miss, it's like, oh man. You know? Like previous Dungeon Master's Guide, you couldn't even assess what they needed because it was just like, this is a mess.
Yeah, the previous one was a mess. This one is at least coherent and great and has helpful. The example encounters that they include using the budget are great. Like, I don't know, if you look at the 6 level 15 PCs fighting against 2 adult red dragons and 2 fire giants, I can tell just by reading that that this is going to be a good system for creating encounters. But why not tell you could have had 1 sentence saying an average day consists of 3 to 5 combat encounters. There is advice for using too many monsters or monsters which fit the budget but have a higher CR than the party's level. And there are the example adventures at the end, which, are kind of useful. But yeah, tell us how many encounters to have per day, give us a template that we can fill out to create an adventure. I think that that's super helpful.
Yeah.
And when we move on to chapter 5 for creating campaigns, similar to the last chapter, this has all of your guides to developing your premise, your arcs, your breakdown of different styles. So are you doing heroic fantasy, epic fantasy, mystery, horror? It also includes a list of all of the published settings that are officially from Wizards of the Coast.
And then it gives us 30 pages about the Greyhawk setting, which I want to skip ahead a little bit because the chapter after this is the Cosmology chapter.
Yeah.
Which gives us the canonical D&D cosmos based on the Great Wheel. And it's also another 40 pages. So we have, out of this book, there are 70 pages that basically cover the Greyhawk setting and the Great Wheel cosmology, which is kind of the D&D canon setting.
I don't disagree with either of these being here, but they are going to be for, in my opinion, not even a 50% slice of the D&D DM base. I think majority of DMs actually are homebrewing, and this is a guide to help you with homebrewing.
Totally.
Do you plan to run Greyhawk? Cool. Do you plan on using the cosmology from the canon D&D setting? Cool. Then these 70 pages are valuable. If you're not setting your campaign in Greyhawk I think is supposed to be this template for what a campaign setting looked like. But again, I would have preferred a form-fillable template.
I agree with you. I don't think that a 30-page dossier as an example of how to design a campaign setting is a good example of how to design a campaign setting, right? I think that for me, if it was more of a give a DM a guide to making a campaign setting, I would have been looking for more questions to ask and being like more tables to roll on, more ideas, more thoughts, rather than just an example setting. Greyhawk is a cool setting. It's your pretty classic, fantasy world, right?
I mean, for the Greyhawk fanatics out there, and I know that you're out there, I know that the people out there who are like, I love Greyhawk so much, congrats. I'm glad that you're really, really happy, and I'm glad that you get a bit of it.
My response to that is I feel like the diehard Greyhawk fans are still using their 3rd edition books.
I mean, fair.
Right?
You're getting a sample of Greyhawk.
I don't know enough about the Greyhawk setting to assess like whether this is true to it or not. The Great Wheel like cosmology section is like, I feel
it's really cool artwork in the Great Wheel section and cool lore to read.
But I've read it a lot.
Yeah, if you know the Great Wheel, you don't need to read it again. If you're brand new to D&D and want to learn about the Great Wheel, it's a great chunk of pages to read. But even for me, I've read the Great Wheel once, and I'm like, nah, not for me.
I'm going to be a voice of dissent. I don't know if devoting 30 pages, which is like 10% of the book, to the planes. Like, I know the planes of existence can be a big part of adventures, but also they can just as easily not.
It's true.
And they can
even if I'm running a canon D&D game, I might not plane hop.
And I feel like plane hopping is a very high level D&D conceit, whereas like I would rather have had like, I mean, I think the Shadowfell and the Feywild are the most like accessible low level planar things to introduce here. I don't know. I could have settled for 10 pages on the planes that just introduce the idea of it.
Yeah.
And then let's have a real manual of the planes and a real deities and demigods book in the future. Right? Like, or like we've had Planescape recently. I don't know. I just feel like this is 70 pages of material that I'm never going to use.
If they had omitted these 70 pages, or better yet, used them for customization and homebrewing tips, and then released a Greyhawk book and a Plains book, I think that would have been better.
Can we also be kind of frank here? Like, I feel like Wikipedia or like various wikis on all these things exist on the internet. And
you can read about the cosmic wheel
like
for
I
free.
don't know if there's actually information here that like is anybody that is reading the DMG encountering this material in such a vacuum now that they don't have any other sources of information on this. I don't know. Like, I guess again, I asked that question, like, I remember in reading these sections in my 3rd edition books when I was first getting into the game and being like, oh, this is really cool, because there wasn't like a wiki article for this. There was nowhere online.
Back in the day,
these books were the only source of this information. So I
couldn't look in my encyclopedia under Great Wheel.
Yeah.
Yes,
right?
I had all the encyclopedias when I was a child.
Well,
I'm that old.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just feel like it's So chapter 7 is on treasure, begins with the usual mundane treasure tables, and then it goes into actually spelling out how many magic items you should award to your group by level.
I love this. I love that this table's here. I've wanted this table my whole life.
Only flaw is it doesn't have guidance for scaling for bigger and larger parties, and it doesn't distinguish between consumable and permanent magic items.
Yeah, but it gives you a rough idea on how many magic items, because I, as a new DM, made the mistake of giving out way too many powerful magic items to my low-level party.
Yeah, and it breaks it out by tier of play.
Yeah,
which is really good. Like, it is telling you, don't give your level 5 characters a legendary magic item.
Don't do it.
But your level, like your high level PCs are going to have like 2 or 3 legendaries per player.
Yeah.
Which kind of blew my mind. There's also bare bones rules for crafting and purchasing magic items. It's the same. Here's very, very, very general prices. And the crafting rules basically amount to spend gold and downtime. So if you wanted a robust economic simulation with detailed crafting rules, you are sad.
There are over 400 magic items in here, though.
Yeah.
And
most are reprints.
But
and unchanged.
Again, we wanted the magic items in here, so they're here. There are a batch of brand new magic items, and all the ones from Xanathar's Guide are brought in. So all of our magic items are in one place, plus a small batch of new ones. But yeah, nothing has changed, which means that magic items that I took issue with, for example, winged boots should be rare or
I think they should be very rare.
Very rare.
Yeah.
That's always been my thought. Winged boots should be very rare. You should give them to a higher level party. Flying on command is pretty awesome. But those haven't changed.
They're still uncommon. Yeah. So if you're hoping, like, this is one section where it's like, you know, I was expecting to do a video of like 5 nerfed magic items. No.
5 magic items that have been fixed.
Yeah. No, we're not going to be doing those videos.
I guess we can do the new magic items.
Yeah.
But there's not much here to say, because you have seen these magic items before. You got your flame tongues. You got your staff of powers. You got your cloaks of the Montebank. They're all here. Yay.
Yeah. There's some pretty cool new weapons and magic items that are based on the items that the kids had from the 1980s D&D cartoon.
Cool.
Which is kind of fun, like the energy bow and like Presto's hat, and the extending acrobatic pole, things like that. So that's kind of cute. There's also enspelled weapons, armor, and staves, which are just basically magic items that cast a spell out of them. I feel like there's been a lot of discussion, and we got this on our review video of like the Thief Rogue, is there's a lot of talk about like character builds that are built around abusing scrolls and magic items. I'm still not here for it. I still feel like the Dungeon Master, I feel like if you're coming into any character build hinging on having a specific item or being able to do something specific with crafting magic items, I don't know if that's going to fly.
I did see a little section in the magic items section, though, that specified that the entire balance of the game is designed around the idea that your players do get magic items. I only glanced at it, but it said something along the lines of, we assume that players are getting magic items and that you can choose not to award any magic items, but it will probably be a more difficult game.
Yeah.
So you are assuming that you're going to get magic items, but what magic items you get is often up to the DM.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those other areas where I think that people that were really hoping for like sane magic item prices, or like a really strong way of like encounters to treasure to gold costs to everything, that this was all going to be like snapped into focus, you're disappointed. You're going to be super sad about all this because it doesn't do that. I don't know if I'm just jaded and wasn't expecting it, but like I think that I like that it's like, here's how many magic items the player should have, and I'm happy with just that. I've kind of gotten used to the idea of gold kind of being a little bit useless in abstract in role-playing games.
I haven't tracked my gold in Drakenheim for 3 years.
No. And I don't know, there's a part of me that's like, that's a ton of bookkeeping, and I really don't necessarily want an economic simulation in my D&D.
But some people like gold.
Some people do like, well, people want to feel
some people love gold, you know?
I mean, I love money. Don't get me wrong. But I do feel that, like, you know, the game rules have never been able to account for like how the fact that like a magic sword costs more than a house or like an army of hirelings. Like, it's never been in line. It's never been realistic. And I just think that, you know, it's kind of one of those areas of the rules where like we just kind of have to like suspend our disbelief a little bit. A lot. But because it's fantasy, and not to defend it, but it just is. Like, I just don't think that economic simulation, like every time the economic simulation rules have been attempted, I don't think that they've ever really worked.
No.
So I don't know. I don't know if it's like impossible, but I just think that like for a role-playing game, you know, like when you look at video games, like no video game RPG attempts to present a balanced economy. They're all kind of just broken by the end, right? But at least the game comes out earlier in the Dungeon Master's Guide and says, if your players find an infinite money glitch, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there you go.
Next up, Chapter 8, we have the rules for Bastions. We are probably going to be doing a whole video on this rules section because there's a lot to cover here, but character-owned strongholds. You can build them and give characters in-game benefits based on the facilities they construct and fill with hirelings.
Is it odd that I love base-building games like Valheim and Dwarf Fortress, but I am like so not here for this?
So I am actually a little bit here for this. I wanted to see this in D&D for a while. I remember in the original concept of Season 2, and now I'm understanding why this happened the way it did. When we were originally conceptualizing Season 2 of Drakenheim, I said, there's got to be a cool tower that we occupy, and then we can maybe like recruit people, and we lightly did it. But then we kind of just forgot about it quickly. And I think that's because you don't care about base building. But meanwhile, I was like, we can recruit people, and we find the blacksmith, and now he can forge delirium items. And then we find this person, and they can. And I like that sometimes. As a matter of fact, I just finished running my Tavern Tycoon campaign where my players had a tavern. And I actually wish that I had these rules because I had them spending the gold that they accumulated from operating their tavern on extending it. So they built a stage for performances. They built like a better kitchen. They built a library. They added magic options into and the more that they expanded it, the more they attracted the town, and their goal was to be better than the Yawning Portal.
Yeah, I guess like, you know, it's ironic because I love my spreadsheet games. I don't mind these things in video games, but like in a role-playing game, I feel like I've always just wanted to get down to the action. And for me, like the Bastion rules and Bastion systems have always felt like this zoomed out meta thing. Yeah. That like I've always felt like it
gives us something to spend our gold on, though.
I know, but it's always felt to me like stronghold rules have always felt like something that work best as something that you do in the group chat between game sessions and not actually at the table.
What I will say about this entire section, obviously Monty and I have mild disagreements here. Yeah. And are these the greatest base building rules I've ever seen? No, but I actually really liked what I saw in this book. It's not going to be for all groups. There are groups out there are DMs and entire player bases who this is another section of wasted pages in this book. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's actually a really cool addition for the groups that are interested in using them.
I mean, I guess the other part of me is like, there was one of the biggest RPG Kickstarters of all time was Matt Colville's Strongholds and Followers, right? And like Colville got people, myself included, really pumped up for like the idea of a stronghold building campaign. I mean, I think Strongholds and Followers is a good book, but it's sat on my shelf. I mean, it's never been used.
Maybe it's just not your cup of tea, but I think I want to speak not just for us, but for everybody in a broader range. I have heard a lot of excitement about this idea.
I guess it's always one of those things where like there's the very old school component to it, where like it was like very part of like the old school D&D.
Yeah.
And to me, it's always felt like a thing best handled by a completely separate book that can actually devote all of the page space needed to running it.
Although I did enjoy how simple this was, of just like you basically, it's like attach section to Stronghold and now you can do these things.
But my voice of dissent is I don't think the point of a Stronghold system is to be simple. I actually think that like...
So I disagree with that. I like this system because it reminds me, once again, big Monster of the Week fan. There's a certain class in Monster of the Week who essentially gets their own stronghold, and you get to choose 3 attachments for your stronghold, and they are going to give, like, you can choose the armory. And now anytime during the game, you can be like, let's go to the armory, and people can gear up. Okay. And then as you level up in Monster of the Week, that character gets to the choice of adding additional rooms to their stronghold, which then give more benefits. And I thought that was such a clean system for like, oh, we've just added X, like a blacksmith shop, and now we can craft magic items and gear. Or you attach the training facility in the Bastion, and now characters can gain weapon and skill proficiencies, and they can even unlock masteries. I'm
willing to acknowledge that this is like a pineapple on pizza thing.
I like pineapple on pizza.
I don't. So, please no, just give me pepperoni, please. So like, it's just not my thing.
And that's fair.
Which is surprising to me that it's not my thing.
Yeah.
But it's not my thing.
It is my thing, and I like that it's here, and I'm happy. So you might be either of the two of us, and maybe this is wasted space, or maybe it's really cool.
Yeah.
You get to decide that for yourself.
So we get 2 appendixes to close out the book. We get a bunch of beautiful maps by Dyson Logos, 15 of them, which are black and white maps, which, to be totally honest, if you like them, go to Dyson Logos' website. He's another Canadian creator. Support Canadian creators. He's got an amazing Patreon. And I would just say my favorite part about this is it's a great advertisement for Dyson Logos, who deserves it.
Yeah. And honestly, you're going to find way more on his website.
Go to Dyson's blog and his website and get more of his maps. It's a ridiculous steal for tons of maps, and it's just a teaser of how useful they are.
Some DMs out there who are using VTTs may have preferred full color maps that they could have then slotted in. You have all of the basics here. Like you have your crypt, you have your ship, you have your, I don't know, dungeon, all of the basic locations in a D&D campaign you can find here. If you were hoping for VTT ready, this isn't it.
Shea Peku is who you want.
Shea Peku.
Yeah.
We're not even being sponsored by them this episode, but we like them anyway.
Yeah. So, I would basically say, like, those are my 2 favorite map creators in general. Like, I think that if you're doing VTT, Shea Peku is the way to go. And if you're playing in person and want, like, robust, old school style maps that are really good for in-person play, because you're going to be using a battle map anyways, or miniatures and terrain, Dyson is the way to go. And then there's a lore glossary that is kind of like a who's who of like famous D&D characters.
It's fun. It's fun for a person who knows the lore but doesn't know it offhand, like myself. I know a lot of the D&D lore, but I actually spend more of my time creating my own worlds than I do remembering and researching the famous lore. So I know the characters, but to just have a little snippet about each one is kind of fun. So I actually love reading over the lore glossary to kind of just get a refresher on every cool person.
Yeah. So, okay.
As a final statement, here's what I'm going to say. This still feels like a book that as an experienced DM, I will glance at and then use 10% of it a whole lot, while the rest I use maybe like sometimes maybe. However, all of the things that are in here that I'm going to gloss over because I know them are still valuable because we have to imagine that this book is being read by a first-time DM. And in that way, it is way better than the 2014 DMG. It is better laid out. It is better structured. It has valuable information that a DM needs to hear. And most importantly, the things that are improved upon greatly, like the ability to manage and design your combat encounters, or even the tiny table that tells me how many magic items to give out to my players, even though we could have used more. Like Monty said, this book is so good that the things that it's missing are glaring, which is a lot of what we talked about. But the things that are here are excellent.
Yeah.
And it's leagues better than the 2014 DMG.
100%.
Leagues better.
It's so much so that, like, my reaction to reading the new DMG was like, wow, they really should have put this out at the same time as the PHB.
A lot of people would have had less issues with the PHB if they had had both these books and been like, oh, everything in the PHB is more powerful. And then you look at the encounter building design and you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Good.
With the caveat that we still haven't seen the monster manual. So which could change things a little bit.
But I've heard that they're gonna scale up a lot of monsters in the monster manual.
My bottom line, this is a book that is worth it for a new GM. 100%. I think that it is worth an experienced GM reading it just for the gameplay philosophy behind it. I think that the idea that the rules are meant to be taken in good faith is something that the community needs to internalize and defend. I think that is an admirable idea, and I believe it very strongly. The rules are tools that empower GMs. They're not a straitjacket. And I think that philosophy is very, very present in this DMG. I think that the new encounter building rules are really strong. They're closer to what we wanted, although the fact that it doesn't really define how many encounters you're supposed to have per day feels like a glaring omission. I like that the treasure tables are much more defined. Again, there's a couple, like, gold is still useless, but it's maybe slightly less useless than before.
My biggest gripe with this book is that we spent so much time on Greyhawk, which I know that, like, again, when they announced that, I remember seeing online a bunch of people being like, yay, Greyhawk. But why didn't we just have a Greyhawk book? Like, we could just have a Greyhawk book. Doesn't need to be part of the DMG. I'm not sure what it's adding to the DMG for me as a dungeon master other than a snippet of a look into Greyhawk.
Can I say that, like, the worksheets, the handout sheets, I wanted more of them. They seem really, like, I like them. I like worksheets.
If we had campaign design worksheets, adventure design worksheets, magic item building worksheets, monster building worksheets, if they had omitted Greyhawk, and of course they're not going to omit the Cosmology. I'm just going to throw that out there. They are not going to.
Yeah.
But if they had omitted Greyhawk, announced a Greyhawk book, and made 20 pages of spreadsheets so that everything that's talked about in this book, you could print out a spreadsheet and just fill out.
Because I feel like a worksheet is actually a useful thing that a dungeon master will use on a regular basis. Some of the worksheets here feel really good. The campaign journal worksheet, 100% Wizards of the Coast. Just take that worksheet and sell people a whole book. Just sell a notebook for $10 that is just this campaign journal worksheet as like a planner.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe with a couple of the other ones at the beginning, right? I think the worksheets that they put in here are one of the strongest elements, but not all the worksheets have been created equally. Yeah. Like, some of them are more useful. Like, the campaign journal looks really, really useful. And I just think that there should have been more of I would have loved it if there was a adventure. It just blows my mind that the one worksheet that should have been in this book, adventure prep. I don't understand, because that would have been, like, straight up, that one page of here's your one page GM prep sheet to prep a D&D adventure would have made this the greatest Dungeon Master's Guide ever printed.
I talk about Monster of the Week a lot because it's one of my favorite systems that I run games in. But Monster of the Week basically says, Oh, you're setting out to create an adventure? In the core book for Monster of the Week, it gives you a play sheet that you fill out as the game master. That is, what's the name of your adventure? What's the hook? And then you write in stages. I think they like break it into like morning, like approaching midnight.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be one day. It's just the way that and then you make things worse with each one, but it's what would happen if the players don't intervene. It's like, here are the goals of the bad guys. Here's what they're going to do next. Here's how they're going to win.
Yeah.
And here's where the world ends. And then you write down your NPCs. So like it gives you this like thing that by the time you finish filling out all the sections, that's all you. I set that
honestly,
next to
you know
me.
what? We're talking too much. I think that you and I should just make this sheet.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll make the sheet and we'll put it out because like it seems so obvious how to make it based on reading the Dungeon Master's Guide for an experienced GM, but I think it should exist.
So maybe we'll make a downloadable sheet for you. That's some work that we're gonna have to do, but we'll see about doing that as soon as possible, and we'll let you know. All in all, we've talked about a lot of gripes, but this book is excellent, and I think that everybody should be getting this book. I think that it addresses a lot of the things that I really wanted to see from the DMG. And if you have thoughts about the DMG, I think that you should let us know about them in the comments below. This has been a pretty long video. Thank you for sticking with us. And we are going to be doing a bunch of other videos in the future looking at specific parts of the DMG. Tell us what you're most interested in us covering as well in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters, which is why we can spend such long videos rambling about D&D books. So if you enjoy these wonderful long form bits of content and want to chat with us more about the DMG, you can get on our patron only Discord server. The links are down below.
And if you want to see us playing some D&D, you can check out our Adventures in the World of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
Yeah, plenty more videos covering the new 2024 books right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.